Hello and welcome. Today we're going to talk about conditional statements A. We're skipping section 2 of this chapter, so we're doing chapter 2, section 3, and we're splitting this into A and B, so two different parts for this section. So the goal for today is constructing conditional statements, also their converse, inverse, and contrapositives, and understand what is a negation to explore the truth value of these statements. So we're going to get into a lot of this stuff, and it looks scary with all these words, but it's not that bad. It's just an if-then statement. So a conditional statement is a logical statement that has two parts, something called a hypothesis, the if part, and something called a conclusion, called the then part. We usually write it as if P, then Q. So where P is representing the hypothesis, so P is that hypothesis, and Q is that conclusion. So those are huge things. So a little example here is if a figure is a square, then it has 4 equal sides. It's just an if-then statement. Basically saying, if this is known to be true, then this hopefully should be true. And that's where we're going to talk about truth of it. So hopefully will be a truthful statement. And that will be that. So now we're going to talk about the negation of something, which, like if you think a negative, it means the opposite in meaning. So it means the opposite in meaning, therefore the opposite in what we call truth value. And we'll talk about that more later. So just a quick example of this right here is the original statement, a rectangle has 4 right angles. To negate that or make it negation, well, a rectangle does not have 4 right angles. It's basically saying not whatever we said on the original statement. That would be the negation of that. So let's just go ahead and do example 1 before we do a couple new vocab terms, which we said were converse, inverse, and contrapositive. They're very scary words, but they're very straightforward. So let's consider the following statement. The team won its most recent game. Check all of the statements below that are negation. So we want to say the opposite of the team won its most recent game. Well, there could be more than one answer. So the team did not win its most recent game. Well, yeah, of course, that's the negation. So it's just saying not whatever this one. If they won it, well, undoing that is just saying not that. Now, the team lost each of his last 3 games. They did lose, but it doesn't say anything about 3 games in this one here, so we're just going to skip that because of it has that last 3 games in there. That doesn't really help us in that situation. Now, it is not the case that the team won its most recent game, which is another way just saying it's not what they did. It's another way to negate it. So this is also a negation of that. So a lot of today's and the next lesson are a lot of words and reading comprehension. So you're going to have to try to use and harness those English skills. And I know we're in math, and yes, we have to do those English skills. So another one is if we look here, if a dress is black, if the dress is black, then Juan likes the dress. So this is an if-then statement. It's a conditional statement. What is the conclusion of this statement? So if you think about it, conclusion is the after the if part. It's the then part. We are going to conclude this is true. So basically, if the dress is black, then Juan likes the dress. This is my conclusion. We can conclude after we know this is true if the dress is black. That's what we're saying. If that happens, then this is our conclusion overall. So that will be our answer. Juan likes the dress. That will be our conclusion. So just identifying the conclusion or the hypothesis, dependent upon the question. Okay, so the last thing of this side are 3 new vocab terms called the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. And again, it's going to deal with this hypothesis and conclusion. If you forgot from above, our hypothesis we're going to label as a lowercase p, and our conclusion is a q. And if you refer above again, we would have if p, and then we would have q. That's kind of like what we start. That's our original. This is our original equation right here, right there. We have if p, then q. Now the converse is going to be formed by swapping. So we're going to swap both that hypothesis So big key maybe underline box, we're swapping them. So we're flipping around the P and the Q. So now it's going to be if, and then I'm going to put those down with a dot, and we're just swapping the Q with the P. We're just flipping around those statements. So our original is P, then Q. Now we're putting the Q first and then the P. So the conclusion will be there and then the hypothesis will be there. And we're going to say it as is and see if it actually is true. We're going to talk about those truth values. Now, the next two are very similar. We're still doing if and then, and we're going to be saying stuff. So we're just going to start by writing if and then, and we're going to use our P's and Q's. In this case, the inverse is negating both the hypothesis. So the key word here is negating. Of this, so we're just saying the opposite of the first original. We go back to always to the original. So all of these three, we focus on the original and say we're going to negate this. So how do I negate that? I say the opposite, or we're going to use a squiggle or tilde. It's not P and not Q. So this word, or right here, this symbol means not or negate. So that is a thing you should highlight. And we could also write that this maybe down below means to negate. Negate. Just as a highlight thing. Now, the contrapositive is actually doing the converse and the inverse. It's doing both. So it's formed by swapping and negating them. So basically, we have to flip both of these and make them the opposite. So if I flip my P's and Q's, so this is now Q, this is now P. And then I just say the opposite of that, the opposite of that. And that would be my three statements. So I'm going to start here, example 3. We're going to find the converse, contrapositive, inverse. It doesn't matter what order. Sometimes they switch these. So just be careful of the words so that you can match them. So the first thing is I like to highlight the P, which is our first part, our hypothesis, and then I'm going to highlight our Q. So if you're doing this on paper, it's a lot easier. And it's very nice, although you have to write a little bit more. So if we think about the converse, remember we're going to do Q. So we're going to do if Q, then P. So let me write that in the correct color. So we're just writing if Q, then P. So we're flipping it around. So whatever that first, we're going to do the blue first thing. So we're going to write this first. So the person, if the person lives in the state of New York. I'm just going to roughly write it out there because I don't have enough room. So in Alex, it's really nice because you just click and highlight the one you want or drag down the box and click it. And then what we're going to do is basically the person, the red part of this, the person lives in the U.S. So if a person lives in New York, then, and that should be a comma, then the person lives in the United States or the U.S. So what is the contrapositive of this? This, remember, is taking this first part. So we basically do the converse and then we negate it. So we're still going to be with the blue part first because we're putting Q first. So remember we're doing not Q and then not P. So let's do not P in red here, so not P. So we're saying not this first part, or this part Q. So how do I say that? The person doesn't, or doesn't live in New York. So the person doesn't live in the U.S. Now, does it have to be true? Well, no, that one's actually not true because you can live in a lot of other different places. And that would be not true in that case. So, like I said, I could live in Minnesota, anywhere in Minnesota, and then I'm still in the United States. So, this first one is incorrect. So, we'll talk about that later in another lesson. So then, one more. Giving the inverse is just saying, well, we're going to take not P, not Q. So again, this will be not P. We're keeping the same order and not Q. So whatever was first, we're just saying the opposite of this and then the opposite of this. We keep the order for inverse the same. So in this case, I have a person basically, we rewrite what we have right above here. The person doesn't live in the U.S. If a person doesn't live in the U.S., then the person doesn't live in New York. And the person doesn't live in New York. And we're talking about the state there. So that would be my inverse, converse, contrapositive, and in any of those orders. So let's do one more example here, and I might hyperspeed this up, so I might pause it and write it so you don't have to watch me write it, so it'll auto-fill in just for time's sake. So let's go ahead and highlight again. So I like to highlight them, so maybe let's highlight that in blue and highlight this one in red. Again, this one would be my P, this one would be my Q. And how I like to do these, if I'm looking at contrapositive, the keywords is finding what we need to know. And I like just writing down, well, we don't want Q, and then we don't want P. So we're flipping it and we're making the opposite, which this is something you could write on a note card. I allow that, or you just reference back to your note. And then the other one, the converse, remember, is just saying Q and then P. So we're flipping them around. So I didn't even write the if and the then part there, which this is just a quick hand way of doing that. And then lastly, remember, you're just saying not P and then not Q. So we're going to write those in that order. So I'm going to pause this in just a moment after I think about it. So contrapositive, we're going to start with not Q. So the square has a side length of 5 inches. A square does not have a side length of 5 inches, is what we'll say here. And then a square does not have a perimeter of 20 inches will be my other part there. So again, I just filled that in quickly, what we said. You just basically say not this and then not that. I didn't have a lot of space. I get that. Some of us write a little bit bigger. So let's try the next one. The converse is just flipping them around. So now we're going to say Q and P. So we're going to say the square has a side length of 5 inches. Then the square has a perimeter of 20 inches. That would be those. And then lastly is just negating them. So it's just saying not that, and then write them down. So it'd be like, if a square does not have a perimeter of 20 inches, then the square does not have a side length of 5 inches. And I'll pause that and write it down. And then once you get that finished, you'll be able to try this next one all on your own, and I will have a rough answer for you. So again, I'm going to write that down here, the answer, and then you can try this one all on your own. So hopefully you tried those. You should have something very similar to this. Sorry if you can't read it. Again, the words are all right here. So we're basically converse is just flipping Q and P around. The contrapositive is flip it and negate it. And inverse is just saying not this and then not that. And I get that you can say, instead of greater than, you could say less than and equal to 10. That is also a okay way of writing that.